Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of A Perspective. This is MJ speaking, and thank you so much for joining us on another episode of the podcast today. Thank you so much for coming back, you guys. It feels like it's been so long since I sat in front of the mic and recorded something for you guys. The truth is that it's been a very busy couple of weeks in between MCAT studying, life stuff, and trying to figure out where the heck I'm going to live in the fall for school. So I just hadn't found the time to properly sit down and record an episode where you couldn't tell how stressed I was. And so I decided to just take a little bit of a hiatus and regroup myself and put something together that was going to be really special and really meaningful and not rushed. So here we are, and I am very excited to be sitting in front of the mic again today. Before we get into the episode, I just want to take a quick second to say two things. The first being that if you didn't know, the podcast officially has an Instagram account, and it is at aperspective.bymjpodcast. You can follow on Instagram, and there is where you can find all the updates on upcoming episodes, guests that will be coming on there, some mindfulness posts I like to throw on there too. So make sure you go give that a follow on Instagram so you never miss an upcoming episode. And also, if you're not already subscribed on the platform where you get your podcasts, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a review and a comment if you'd like, just because that helps reach more people that way. And I would love it if we got more community members to join the A Perspective community. Second thing is that I do want to take a second to acknowledge that this episode is being recorded on the traditional unceded territory of the Coquitlam, Squamish, Stalo, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations communities, whose relationship with the land stands to this day. And if you are Canadian and currently listening to this podcast episode from Canada, I guess this applies to everybody, but pertains most if you're a Canadian. It is Canada Day in a couple days from when I'm recording this episode. And if you are somebody who has the annual tradition of celebrating Canada Day, I do want to invite you and hopefully challenge you to take a second this Canada Day and really reflect on what this day means to you and what this day means for our country. Because as much as it is a day to celebrate the Constitution of the beautiful nation that we have the privilege of living in, it also represents all of the lives that were lost at the cost of making this nation a thing and a reality. And I think it's really important for us as the privileged uninvited settlers that we are on this land to recognize our privilege and to recognize that we are living here at the expense of a lot of pain and trauma that was done onto the Indigenous individuals that were here before us. And I think that as Canadians, it is our responsibility to make sure that everybody in our nation has the treatment and the equity that they deserve. And one way of doing that is by showing our respects in recognizing that this day does not only stand as a defining moment in history where our nation was brought together, but also of all of the events that led up to that moment. And so I invite you on this Canada Day to really reflect on what this day means to you and what you want this day to mean for our nation in the future, and how we can make our nation a more inclusive and caring society for everybody in it. Now, before getting into the content of the episode, I want to start it off on a newer note. This is something that I want to start implementing into probably each solo episode I do. I don't know if I will be implementing it into guest episodes. You guys can let me know in the comments if you like this kind of thing. But I want to start every solo episode for now in the future off with a little anecdote, which I'm calling a perspective shifter, which I feel like is very applicable to the name of the podcast and the theme of the podcast. But what these are is just kind of, it's a bit of a way to give you guys a life update with what's going on with me, but also to kind of open up the conversation for anyone and everyone who is listening and maybe going through something similar or has something to say about something that was mentioned, and hopefully provokes some thought in you. It's really important for me to create a connection through the microphone and through the speaker where you're listening from with you guys because you can't see me and you can only hear my voice. So it's really important for me to be super transparent about who I am and what I'm going through to hopefully invite more people in and encourage people who may be going through something similar. So these won't be these will be super random. They'll just be moments from my week, or it'll be something I read about or heard of on a podcast or in a book or something that kind of sparked thought in me, or something that happened to me, and I want to share with you. So hopefully it provokes some thought in you as well. So this week's perspective shifter, I'm hoping they'll be a little bit more positive, but this one is starting on a not so positive note. These last 2 weeks, I really hit a wall with life, I guess. I was going really steadily and really hard on my studying and preparation for my MCAT exam. I really felt like I had a grip on my schedule, like I was managing to work out and still get my day off in the week and even go for walks in the mornings. It was great. And then the last 2 weeks were super, super busy with a lot of stuff. My sister graduated high school, so I got to take pictures for her and go to all the events, all the COVID-friendly events that her school threw for them, thankfully. And just amidst a lot of other things, I was running around for 2 weeks, and last week I just really felt myself hit burnout. And what this started looking like, I've experienced burnout before, so I kind of know my triggers and I kind of know how it manifests itself. And what that looks like for me is I noticed that my temper was not as high as I can usually muster it to get. I was getting really frustrated at my mom and my sister, who I'm living with, at things that were really insignificant, and just not being able to find the will or the motivation to sit down in front of the screen. And your brain is just going through all this brain fog, and I wasn't sleeping. I was having a really hard time sleeping. And so this last weekend, thankfully, I had the opportunity to go to Victoria on Vancouver Island, where I go to school, to look for some housing apartments for the fall when I go back to attend in-person classes there, which is crazy to think about. I'm so excited. But on this trip, I was able to see some really close friends. I got to see my boyfriend, which was awesome, and just really get back into the present moment. And I think I realized that that for me is a huge contributor to my well-being when I'm going through times of stress. And I think I can speak for a lot of people as a whole when I say that so oftentimes one of the things that causes us the most to feel the most burnt out is this feeling like that thing that we are aiming for in the future is so far away and it's not coming any sooner, and we start worrying about the outcome, and we look at where we are in our progress and we're just panicking because we're not where we would like to be at or where others are at if we're comparing ourselves. And I think for me, getting back to that present moment and being with people who remind me of who I am and why I do what I do, and people who remind me of my worth, was a huge wake-up call to remind myself that all you have is the now, and there's no sense putting your energy into focusing on and worrying about the future, which is something that has not even happened yet, because that is just time spent and wasted worrying on things that haven't even happened yet, right? So if you are currently experiencing burnout, it's very real, and I want to encourage you to take some time for yourself. I know everyone says that, and it's so much easier said than done because it's so hard to not feel guilty. That was a huge thing for me too, when I didn't feel like sitting down at my desk to study and I knew I just needed a break away from the screen. I felt so guilty because I was like, I should be studying, this time I could be spending. But in reality, would you rather force yourself to sit down for 4 hours in which you barely get anything done because your mind is somewhere else, you're exhausted, you're in a bad mood, Or would you rather just take an hour to go for a walk, do some exercise, do some cooking, whatever floats your goat and makes you happy, so that you're recharged and are better able to focus and get stuff done later? And I think that was a huge reminder too. There is no sense in pushing yourself if you've reached a cap at which you are not going to be able to go past because you're done. You're mentally done. So this experience was a huge reminder for me that burnout is real and you shouldn't feel guilty for it, because it just means that you've been working super hard and it's normal to want to take a break. And I think the best way to do that is to go back to your roots and your fundamentals, and to back to the people that remind you of who you are and why you're doing what you're doing. And to also look in the mirror and remind yourself of what that reason is, and to concretely solidify that why, so that you can go back, keep going, keep fighting for this thing that you're working towards better than before, hopefully. So that was this week's perspective shifter. Now, on to the actual content of the episode. I'm really excited about this because I put a poll up on my stories a couple of weeks ago, just asking what you guys wanted to see on here and future topics that you wanted me to discuss. And this was arguably one of the most voted for, or one of the ones that you guys most suggested, which was anxiety and dealing with anxiety, coping with anxiety, what makes us feel anxious. And so I really like these episodes because they give me a chance to go hit up Google and just do a ton of research and learn a ton of stuff that I can share with you guys, but also apply to my own life. So this topic is also really close to my heart because a lot of people close to me suffer from anxiety and experience anxiety in their daily lives. And I think being able to go through with making this episode was really eye-opening towards a lot of the things that I know that people around me are experiencing, but haven't been able to comprehend fully in the past. And I think that hopefully this helps me help them, and also helps you in your own life apply these tips to yourself, or to others that you know that may be experiencing something similar. So anxiety is incredibly prevalent in our society. According to the National Mental Health Institute of the United States, 31.1% of adults in the US experience anxiety at one point in their lives. And according to the Anxiety Disorders Association of Canada, 1 in 4 Canadians, so 25%, will have at least one anxiety disorder in their lifetime. Those are staggering numbers, and these have most likely increased by quite a bit since the start of the pandemic for obvious reasons. So as you can tell, it's very common in our society to experience anxiety and feelings of anxiety, and it's just about doing the work to understand and pinpoint the triggers that are making us feel anxious in order to avoid these feelings of unease in the future. And one really quick distinction that I want to make before we get into the content of the episode is the difference between the feeling of anxiety and an anxiety disorder. Because anxiety itself is a feeling that is extremely common to human beings and unavoidable as beings. Because when we experience anxiety, it is a natural response elicited by our sympathetic nervous system, which, for those of you that have heard me on here talk about this, this will be a refresher to you. But if you're new here, the sympathetic nervous system is the region of your nervous system that is responsible for your fight or flight response. So as soon as you are faced with any type of stressor, this part of the nervous system is activated in order to prime you for survival, because this nervous system cannot discriminate a threatening stimulus between a lion chasing you to kill you or a deadline that you haven't met. So the response is uniform across all stressors. Now, the difference between the feeling of anxiety and an anxiety disorder is that like I said, anxiety is a feeling that we can present multiple times in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year, just based off of an exposure to a stressor. Now, the difference between the feeling of anxiety and the disorder is that in a disorder, this response is always on. So when your sympathetic nervous system is on, you feel things like rapid heart rate, sweating, shakiness, just overall unease and like high angstiness, right? When somebody has a disorder, this is unregulated. It is very difficult for them to turn this response off no matter what they do. Whether it's breath work, whether it's just taking a moment to simmer down, drinking some water, it's really hard for them to downregulate this response. And I don't want you to suddenly assign yourself as somebody with an anxiety disorder. If you're listening right now and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I've been feeling anxious for the last 2 months, I must have an anxiety disorder. That is not at all the case, because this is so individualized, right? If you are going through a period of high stress, whether it's at work or school, with your children, with your partner, etc., you are prone to being in this high anxiety state for long periods of time. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you now have an anxiety disorder. It's just that when you don't tell your body that it can now de-stress and turn off the fight or flight response, you are prone to staying in that state for elevated periods of time without even noticing it, right? And it's only because you haven't given your body the green flag to say, hey, we're good, we survived, we made it, there's no need for this system to be upregulated still. And I will be going into strategies in order to bring you back down to baseline as this episode goes. But what I'll be doing is talking about certain triggers that may be provoking anxiety within you that you may not be aware of necessarily, or that you may kind of know of, but don't know exactly how they trigger anxiety. So I have a list of about 6 or 7 here that I'll be sharing with you guys. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The first possible anxiety trigger that you may be suffering from is unresolved trauma. And this looks very different on everybody. I want to lay that right off the bat. Anxiety is a very individualized experience for all of us, but the way in which unresolved trauma provokes anxiety within a lot of us is through situations, people, conversations, and circumstances in general that we are presented with that suddenly provoke, that kickstart this feeling of anxiety within us for no apparent, that may not have an apparent reason to us for kickstarting, but they do. And what that is your potential trauma showing through. When we experience traumatic events, our bodies heighten our fight or flight response to respond. But like I mentioned before, if we don't address this response for extended periods of time, the response will stay on and it can make us hyperreactive, stressed, and anxious long term. When we go through something that made us feel bad about ourselves, that presented us with a danger, that was an immediate threat to us and our mental well-being, our minds create negative associations with these events and work to avoid them in the future, a lot of times without our conscious awareness of this avoidance. So unfortunately, a lot of the times we go through trauma, it occurs in our childhood. And at that age, we're not aware enough and don't have the coping mechanisms still to recognize that as a trauma. And we don't recognize that our sympathetic nervous system is now hyper aroused. So traumas can be large or small, and they can be accumulated events that have built up over time, causing you to unconsciously avoid or show dissonance from a person or a particular situation, causing you to avoid them in the future. And once you are presented with them in the future and forced to face them, you're going to feel anxious. So a very, I think, I don't want to say universal, but I think a very common example of something like this is something like public speaking or going to the beach in the summer. So say you went up and did a speech in front of your class when you were younger, or this could have been recent too. This could have been yesterday, right? For the broadness that trauma encompasses. So say you went up and did a speech and you got laughed at, or something didn't go right, or somebody told you a comment that about your performance that didn't sit well with you, you're probably going to be more prone to avoiding that in the future. And the thought of getting up on a stage and giving another speech is going to provoke you anxiety. In terms of the beach, a lot of us know, for men and women, that this is a time in the year that is very anxiety provoking because of body image issues for many people. So if we grew up, and unfortunately this is something that is woven into our minds from such a young age through conscious and unconscious processes, we see the models in the magazine with these perfect bodies, and we see kind of the ideal of like what a bikini body is, and we see all these ads saying, get your summer body in 2 days and 20 hours, whatever it is. And we start tying our worth to our body and what we look like. And so the beach, the thought of it for a lot of people, just the thought of going to the beach can be really anxiety provoking and just lead to a really bad down spiral of negative emotions and negative self-talk for a lot of people. I am definitely someone that struggles from this, not as much now because I feel like I've gone forth and tried to do a lot of work in myself to recognize that my worth is not tied to the way I look. However, it's very hard to detangle yourself from that ideal when it is so woven intricately into our society and our societal beliefs, right? So in order to identify whether unresolved trauma is what is provoking your anxiety, I encourage you to, the next time that if you're forced to put yourself in a position that is quite uncomfortable for you, notice the feelings that arise in the moment when the opportunity is presented to you. Because oftentimes we don't even realize the moment at which these feelings arise. So we just are stressed for long periods of time, and we can't even remember the origin of the feeling and when it started. So be very attentive with your feelings. And as soon as you feel kind of that rapid heartbeat and sweating and feelings of discomfort and maybe high temperament set in after you've been presented with the opportunity, ask yourself, okay, this triggered me. Why is that? And, disclaimer, this does mean oftentimes going back into your past to face and come to terms with uncomfortable memories and situations in which you may have found yourself in before. But I can promise you that this is super rejuvenating and helpful for you in your journey towards resolving your anxiety if you suffer from it, so that you can take the steps necessary towards coming back from it and healing from it so that you are not as bothered by these triggers in the future. Possible anxiety trigger number 2 is food. I'm sure you've all heard of this before, but recently there's been so much astounding research on the effects of food and on the brain. It's so fascinating to me as an aspiring physician and just as an individual in general, how much our food influences our mood and our mental state. And so to give a quick explanation as to how the food is tied to the brain, let me tell you about what the gut-brain axis is. So in opposition to the sympathetic nervous system that I just spoke to you about, the antagonistic system, which should be, I should say, our default system, is the parasympathetic nervous system. So while your sympathetic nervous system raises your heart rate and gets you sweaty and makes you feel uneasy, your parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for bringing down that heart rate, decreasing the sweating, sending blood to homeostatic processes like digestion and metabolism. It works in opposition to the sympathetic nervous system, essentially, and it should be our default mode of going about our lives. So there is a nerve, arguably the most important nerve in the parasympathetic nervous system, called the vagus nerve. And this nerve runs from our brain down to a ton of organs involved in a lot of body processes. So one of the connections that this vagus nerve is tied to is the stomach. So when we eat something that makes us feel uneasy, or we are in a situation where we feel queasy or in disgust or distaste, our brain is receiving all these signals from our stomach, right? And not only that, very recent research has found that a lot of serotonin receptors, and many of you will know serotonin as kind of the happiness hormone and the happiness regulator hormone, that a lot of serotonin receptors are found in the lining of our digestive system. So if we're eating things that aren't making us feel so good, we are going to be out of balance and we're not going to feel so great. So this can lead to stomach upsets and indigestion, and nobody likes that, and that puts us in a bad mood. So food affects anxiety, and it triggers anxiety in a variety of different ways. So what I'm going to do here is kind of break some down for you and hopefully help you pinpoint some foods in your diet that may be provoking anxiety for you. So there are some foods that are natural anxiety triggers, like stimulants. So we know these as caffeine and alcohol, refined sugars, trans fats, pops, alcohol. Anything that is very processed is a 5-star for anxiety trigger. And why this is, I'll talk about refined sugars first. So refined sugars and processed foods with a high glycemic index, what this means is that these foods have the capacity to bring our blood sugar up very, very quickly. And this can be really stressful on our body, because that means that the body has to shoot out a mass amount of insulin, which is the hormone that brings down our blood sugar levels. And some of you may have heard of sugar rush. So we feel super, super good for maybe an hour after we consume these foods, and then very quickly we just get a crash, right? And that doesn't feel so good, because now we're not at an optimal functioning state. In terms of caffeine, what this does is caffeine is a stimulant. It is also a diuretic hormone, which I will explain in a second. But what caffeine does is it elevates our heart rate. It can cause really bad heart palpitations for people who are extra sensitive to it. And it just because it is meant to make us alert, it is going to just send our body firing, right? So the problem with caffeine is that a lot of times we feel like we're feeling anxious, but in reality, it is that anxiety response that is being triggered in our bodies, because caffeine is stimulating us and our nervous system to be alert. And it can be really stunting for a lot of us. It can be really uncomfortable. And being that it is a diuretic hormone, it's going to make you go to the bathroom more often. And that's never enjoyable when you have to be stepping away from work for extended periods of time. So moral of the story for this one, avoid stimulants wherever possible in the form of processed foods and or caffeine. And I'm going to talk about ways to regulate your caffeine intake if you're a serious coffee drinker like I am. But before we get into that, another common anxiety trigger related to food is skipping meals. So skipping meals can lower blood sugar, and this can make us shaky, because our body needs sugar to function and to carry out its day-to-day processes. And if it's not getting that, we're going to feel weak, we're going to feel tired, and we're going to feel shaky. And this shakiness can feel to us as though we are anxious, in the sense that we are shaking and not in control, but in reality, your blood sugar is low and your body needs it so that it can not feel weak still. Suddenly cutting back on a food that you've been eating and suddenly decided to take out of your daily diet can cause withdrawal symptoms. And this can lead to anxiety, because if your brain is craving something that it's not getting, it's going to keep knocking at your door until you give it what it wants, right? So If you just decided to cut something out of your diet for whatever reason that may be, try not to cut it out too quickly if it's something that you are used to consuming on a day-to-day basis, because you will most likely feel anxious because your brain is asking for it and it's not getting it. So those were the triggers are related to food. So in order to combat these triggers and hopefully make your diet a little bit more wholesome in ingredients and vitamins and minerals that can help your anxiety, and tips to decrease feelings of anxiety from some of these are as follows. So this is a personal hack of mine. I don't know if I feel like this works, but again, I might be biased because it has only worked on me and I haven't asked anybody else. So I am a huge coffee lover. I have coffee every single morning. And I was a caffeine drinker. I don't think I was ever dependent on caffeine, but I also can't say that because I just crave coffee every single morning. So now I'm a decaf drinker. But on the occasion where I do go to Starbucks or JJ Bean or a coffee shop and actually get coffee, what I like to do is, if I order online, especially from the Starbucks app, if you're somebody who drinks coffee, here's a hack for you. So when you click on a drink and add it to your shopping cart, you can go into the drink and there's an option for you to stylize it, right? You can add creamer, sweetener, syrups, whatever. If you're drinking coffee, there's an option for the number of espresso shots in every single coffee drink. And most coffee drinks at Starbucks, at least, and I think most coffee shops, is 3 espresso shots. For me, that's a lot. I know some people that drink more than that in a day, and I have never understood. But what I've been trying to do is, if I really find like one day I'm really craving that coffee and there's no decaf option for whatever reason, I will manually set that number to 1 espresso shot. And that has made a huge difference in my life. So there's a tip for you if you are an avid caffeine drinker and you're trying to cut back without stunting yourself or giving yourself those withdrawal symptoms. It's a really great way to just start training yourself to not depend on it as much by just bringing down the caffeine content in your drink. A lot of times we also feel anxiety because we are missing certain important vitamins and minerals in our diet that help regulate a lot of our body processes that, if unregulated, can lead to anxiety. So consider supplying your diet with foods rich in magnesium, like leafy greens, nuts, seeds, and whole grains, omega-3s like nuts and seafood, and consume more foods that are rich in antioxidants. So magnesium and omega-3s, very important for brain function, higher executive functioning, learning, and homeostasis in the body. So if you're missing those, odds are that you are way more prone to falling out of balance with just like a little stimulus that throws you off a little bit. The thing with antioxidants, so antioxidants are foods and chemicals that regulate what are called free radicals in the body. We generate free radicals as humans and animals and all species almost in general. They are natural byproducts of metabolism. However, after high stress activities like exercise, and even in states of stress, these free radicals are produced at a higher rate, and they can't be regulated by our cells, because if our metabolism is upregulated, our cells are focusing on carrying out the metabolism versus dealing with the byproducts, right? And if these accumulate when we calm down for a little bit, that puts our cells in a lot of stress to get rid of them, because these free radicals can combine with organelles in our cells and parts of our tissues and potentially cause damage. So what antioxidants do is they bind to these free radicals and lower their concentrations in our bodies so that our cells aren't under as much stress. So some really good antioxidants to start implementing into your diet are dark fruits like blueberries, blackberries, apples, and plums. Green tea and ginger turmeric tea have huge antioxidant properties. So those are some really good suggestions to implement some antioxidants into your diet. Hydration is a huge one. And again, hydration has a huge impacts on homeostasis and overall feelings of satiety and balance. But if you're dehydrated, this can also cause brain fog and take away from your alertness. And if you're not feeling alert and you planned on getting really productive on a certain day, you're going to start to feel anxious if you're not getting done what you need to be getting done, right? So hydrate throughout your day. You know, the standard 8 bottles of water a day, more if you are in BC right now, because if you're listening and you're from BC, then you will totally relate. But for those of you that don't know, we are in a huge heat wave here in BC. I think yesterday was the peak of it and it felt like 45 degrees Celsius here. Today is a little bit more tolerable, but it's still horrible. I think it feels like 39 today. So we're cooking, which means we need more water intake so our body can get what it needs. So get in your water content every single day. And the last tip I have here to hopefully combat food anxiety triggers is to get your microbiome checked. So what a lot of people don't know is that there is a very, very, very high concentration of normal, healthy bacteria in our intestines, and what they are called are microflora. And don't fact check me on this, but what I've heard in my classes is that we actually have more bacteria in our body, in our just simply in our gut microbiome than there are cells in our body. So there's more bacteria lining our intestines than there are cells in our body, which is ridiculous because I think we have like total of like trillions of cells or something. So that's a huge number. But what these gut microbes are responsible for are they help us to break down a lot of the food that we consume. So when this microbiome is unbalanced or we're missing some important types of bacteria in there, we don't have as much as we should, as we need to have healthy digestion. This can provoke anxiety if our digestive processes are hampered for any way. So what you can do is this isn't sponsored, this is my own personal research and things that I've heard in my classes at school. There is a company called Viome, Viome, and they will test your microbiome for you. So all you got to do is you got to go online, you request a kit, and they'll send you your little kit that includes a little kind of cup, and you got to go poop into the cup. Might not like it so much, but you got to poop into this cup, and then you send it back to them, and they will analyze your microbiome and send you a chart with the percentages of certain microflora in your digestive system so that you know which ones you're missing or which ones you might not have as much of, so that you can take necessary measures to populate your microflora with these bacteria so that your digestive system can run smoothly as it needs to. So that's it for food. Now, the third possible anxiety trigger that you may be suffering from is social media. We never like hearing this one, but it's the truth. Social media is arguably one of the biggest contributors to anxiety for a lot of us. I say all of us, but I don't know if everybody here is active on social media, but it is a huge contributor to the rising anxiety levels that we are seeing in society today for a plethora of reasons. But I'm going to focus this section specifically on developing our relationship with social media so that we can control its impacts on our mental well-being. So, according to a study done by Anna Vannucci and her colleagues, it was found that in a sample of 563 subjects, the average amount of time spent on social media was 6.63 hours per day. And they found that there was a positive correlation between the time spent on social media by the subjects and the levels of reported anxiety that they gave. So what this means is the more time you spend on social media, the higher your levels of anxiety are prone to being. For, like I said, a multitude of reasons, like counts are huge anxiety provokers due to the self-comparison, comparing bodies, follower count. Let's not forget that a lot of people only post the good parts about their lives and their days on their stories, on their posts, and we don't see the ugly. And this has led us to subconsciously create a notion that we should always be happy because this is what people are presenting on social media, right? And that's not the truth, right? Life gets down, because it is life and that is what happens. But if we're not seeing this, if we're not seeing people showcase this, then we are going to start telling ourselves and believing that there's something wrong with us because we don't feel happy-go-lucky 24/7. And that's just not the case. So in order for you to have a relationship with your social media where you control it versus it controlling you, you have to have boundaries and intentions whenever you go into social media. For any of you that have watched the Social Dilemma documentary on Netflix, you'll know how crazy and how advanced the technology on social media is, and how developed these algorithms are so that they control us and our social media experience. So for those of you that haven't seen it, if you don't want a spoiler, skip ahead. But if you don't really care, what this documentary outlined is that social media companies see humans and the people that are using their apps as products, essentially, right? And what they're doing is they have these insanely well-developed and well-designed algorithms that pretty much know us to a T. These algorithms know when we're sad, when we're hungry, when we're happy, based on the content that we are seeing online. So say I'm super sad and I go on Instagram and I'm looking at sad posts or motivating posts to try to get my happiness back up there. What this algorithm does is it takes that information and then starts showing me related posts and happy posts in the future times that I log onto Instagram, so that I am just addicted to going back and seeing this content, and it just makes me more likely to keep logging onto the app, right? So it's really crazy. And if you if you want to stunt yourself and get a new idea of what social media really is, I highly encourage you to watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix. It's really eye-opening, and it definitely has changed my relationship with my social media. But what I want to do now is give some tips as to how you can develop a healthy social media relationship, if such thing really exists. But just so that you can not be affected by the things that you're seeing on social media as much in the future. So tip number one is to set a social media limit on your phone. And the way to do this is, if you're already somebody that spends a lot of time on social media, like 3+ hours a day, slowly decrease this number every week. So maybe you decrease it by 15 minutes every single week, right? Because it's very similar to the withdrawal that we talked about in the food section of this podcast. If you bump your number down from 4 hours to 1 hour, it's going to be really hard for you. So try bumping it down by like maybe 15 to 30 minutes maximum and see how you feel every single week. Tip number two is to have at least one social media free day per week. This is just like a detox day. You don't go on social media at all. You intentionally allocate your time towards doing other things, whether it's reading a book, going for a walk, going and exercising, going to see a friend, etc. Have at least one day a week where you do not open your social media at all, so that you can detox yourself from it, come back to the present moment, ease those feelings of self-comparison that you may be feeling by seeing other people's lives on there, and just remind yourself that there is a tangible and present world outside of the screen. Tip number three, because I feel like this is a really hard section for business owners to listen to. If you're a business owner like I am and you feel as though you have to be on your phone consistently to engage with your audience and with clients and to post content and do marketing on there, what you can do is, one, set times throughout the day where you set the intention of going on social media. So maybe it's 2 hours per day, and set the intention to relay this information to your viewers. So you tell your viewers, okay, every single day from Monday to Friday, I am on Instagram from 1 to 3 p.m. This is a time where you can interact with me, speak to me. These are my allocated work hours for social media. Alternatively, if you feel like you can afford it, you can also hire a social media coordinator or somebody to run your social media for you, so that you're not on as much and you're not you don't have to be stressed about the content that you're posting. It's already being done for you. That's a really good alternative. And outside of posting things for work, maybe later in the evening, you go on for an hour to just do a little bit of your own personal browsing. The key for this is to just have the ability to regulate the times that you spend on there and be able to have a little bit of self-control when it comes to the amount of time that you're spending on social media. Tip number 4 is to be selective on the content that you follow on your social medias. And so oftentimes we like see memes that our friends are sending us and quotes that our friends are sending us, and we're like, oh, if they're sending it to me, it must be a great account, so I'm going to follow them too. And then that account starts posting really toxic things like promoting diet plans or whatever the heck, right? But if you go through your following list and pick apart the accounts that are consistently showing you content that does not appeal to you or makes you feel stressed when you see it, unfollow them. And this can include news accounts, right? It's super, I always feel really guilty because I feel like I'm never in the loop of what's going on in the outside world until my mom tells me or somebody else tells me, or I see it pop up on like Apple News on my phone or something. I feel like I'm seldom, like I have no idea what the COVID counts have been here in BC for like the last 3 months. All I know is that they've gone way low, and that is why we are able to open up restaurants and see friends again. But other than that, I never check the news just because it provokes a lot of anxiety for me, at least. And my mom starts every single day off with the news on, and I have no idea about how she does it. But it's just about recognizing that does not make you ignorant, and that it doesn't make you somebody that wants to be in the loop of what's going on. There are other tangible ways and organic ways to get in touch with what's going on in society without it affecting your mental health, or at least without being exposed to it as much as you are when you're just mindlessly scrolling on Instagram, right? So be selective and don't feel guilty about it. Tip number 5, and last one for this section, is to have an intention every single time you go on social media. This doesn't relate to what I spoke about with business accounts earlier. This is actually my own personal tip, something I found that has worked a lot for me. So a lot of us, when we're bored, our immediate instinct is to just go on social media and numb and mindlessly scroll, right? When we do that, we're not as in control of the things that we are consuming, the things that we're seeing. If we're just mindlessly scrolling, we're going to read through posts and not even know what we're doing and consume content that is going to go into our subconscious and affect us later, right? So what I've tried to do now is to move away from when you're bored, go scroll on Instagram, take your mind off things, whatever, to when I'm bored, unless I haven't responded to a DM on Instagram, or unless I haven't responded to a message, or there's a post I want to upload, my boredom time is selectively restricted to calling friends, going to exercise, going for a walk, reading, anything that isn't social media in general. And when I do go on social media, when I set time in my day to go on social media, I have an intention. So I say, okay, I'm going on here today to catch up with a certain person. Maybe I'm looking for some insight on wellness or health tips, or I want to get ideas for my next gym workout, whatever it is, right? That way you are curating your experience, whether it's 10 minutes to an hour of the content that you want to see, right? And it's way easier to filter out useless or negative content that way when you are going on there for a specific intention versus just passively taking it in without you really noticing what you're taking in, essentially. So this has helped me a lot, and hopefully if you implement it into your life, let me know. I'd like to know how it went for you. And that's just a better way for you to build a healthy relationship with your social media in the future. Reason number 4 why you may be experiencing anxiety in your day-to-day is because you are suffering from a lack of sleep. So again, another one that we've probably all heard of a lot before, but the thing about sleep is that it doesn't overtly cause anxiety, but it can exacerbate anxiety symptoms. So if we're sleepy, like I mentioned before, we've got that brain fog, we can't function properly. And if we're not being productive when we set the intention to be in a day, odds are we're going to get angsty because we're just not getting done the things that we want to get done, right? And we can lose sleep for a lot of reasons, but here I've got some tips for you to ensure that you don't lose sleep the next time you need to really settle down and get stuff done so that you can avoid that anxiety. So tip number one, turn your phone off 30 minutes to 1 hour at least before you go to bed. And to tie this into a similar idea, dim the lights in your room 1 hour before bed. So the reason why I bring this up is because to give you another little physiology lesson here, real quick, our sleep-wake cycle is regulated by what are called circadian rhythms in our bodies. And these circadian rhythms essentially send hormones out when our body perceives that it's daytime and when our body perceives that it's nighttime. So the only way for these circadian rhythms to recognize that is by their exposure to darkness and lightness, right? So if you're staring at your phone screen before you go to bed, your body is going to perceive that it's still daytime. So it's not going to send out important hormones like melatonin to start feeling you sleepy and start priming you for sleep. So the way to start telling your body, okay, it's nighttime, you got to start sending out those hormones, is to start making the environment around you darker. So this involves putting your phone away, and dimming lights in your room is a really good help to start preparing yourself for sleep and telling your body it's okay to downregulate the daytime hormones and upregulate the nighttime hormones. Tip number two is to journal or meditate before bed to release any anxious thoughts that you experience throughout the day. A lot of times we go to bed without realizing that we are still in a stress state, and or not releasing the stress of the day, and thus it carries over into our sleeping time, whether it's through insomnia, not being able to sleep because we are still thinking about these things, or it elicits itself through nightmares too, right? And if we wake up from a nightmare in the middle of the night, odds are we're not going back to bed, right? So if you set the conscious intention to journal or meditate before bed, and maybe even pick a specific journal prompt or meditation that probes you to release anxiety and has guided cues for you to release the anxiety that you've experienced throughout the day, you can let these feelings go and have a more restful sleep, and even get some perspective on why you were feeling the way you were feeling and what you were feeling exactly and what provoked it, so that you can be more immune to it in the future. Tip number four, and the last one for this section, is to have calming remedies before sleep. If you're somebody like the previous section, if you really like having a little something before bed to calm that appetite or just get yourself settled in, feeling nice and fuzzy, really good way to do this is to have calmants that have sleep-inducing effects. So common ones are warm beverages like tea or milk with honey, milk and or tea with spices like chamomile, cinnamon, or cardamom. Believe it or not, milk and cardamom with a little bit of honey is just finger licking. It's so good. And it just, what these things do is that they just induce like a really good feeling of fuzziness and warmth within you that primes you for sleep. And chamomile has chemicals that stimulate sleepiness. So these are really good ways if you want to add a little bit of something extra and treat yourself before bed. Really good strategy to ensure that you get the most out of your sleep. Reason number 5 why you might be feeling anxious is, nobody ever likes hearing this one, but we're going to be blunt on here, is the people that you're hanging out with. And this is tied largely into the unresolved trauma section that I spoke about earlier, but a lot of times we struggle to set boundaries, right? And we struggle to push people away because we feel that it is our duty to keep certain people in our lives and to engage with certain people because that they have either done things for us and we feel indebted to them, or because they're friends of a friend or friends of a partner, etc. The list goes on, right? But a lot of times, if the people in our lives are putting excessive expectations on us, or they're pressuring us to do things, complaining to us a lot, etc., the presence of these people in our day-to-day can affect us a lot. So the way you can tell if it's somebody that you're hanging out with it is that if you get a text or a phone call from somebody, or you know that you're going to a gathering or a party where a certain person or group of people are going to be at, you're going to feel that anxiety response trigger itself right away, almost, right? Feelings of dread, feelings of wanting to go, feelings of avoiding the situation is probably a really good indicator that you're probably not a great fan of this person or this group of people, right? So the way to regulate those feelings of anxiety around these people, got a couple reasons here. A is to set boundaries with them. And if it's a person that is really pushy, like at all times of the day wants to talk, maybe overtly tell them, I'm only on my phone a certain amount of time a day because I like to focus on my work, on my school, on my family, whatever it is. So you can reach me from 2 to 4 every single day, right? Setting boundaries can also look like saying no, right? I am a huge advocate for the no is a sentence in itself. The word no is a sentence in itself. And if somebody asks you to go out one day, they're pushing you, or they're pushing you to consume something at a party, or they're pushing you to do something that just is out of your comfort zone and you don't want to do it, no, thank you is a perfect response in itself. And you don't feel like you need to give another reason, because you are entitled and you have the right to your boundaries and to your limits that you set for other people. If you are considering talking to them and maybe this person is doing something that has upset you or has hurt you in the past, a really good way to bring this into conversation is by using I statements. And the thing about using I statements to describe your feelings of hurt and unease with a person is that you are not labeling a person as an attacker or somebody that has hurt you to them. So the way to go about using I statements is, say, you heard about a friend that talked smack about you behind your back, or there's been talking smack about a friend to you, to your face. And what an I statement for something like this looks like is saying, I heard that you spoke to so-and-so about me behind my back and you said XYZ, and this made me feel like blank. Or I feel like you talking about this person to me behind their back is unjust because they are our friend and because it isn't solving any problems and it is only offending them behind their back, right? When you speak to how that person has made you feel versus outright labeling them as, you've been saying XYZ, you're a horrible person, I'm not saying that's how anybody would approach the situation, I would hope, but when people are criticized, they are way more likely to be defensive about it and to try to justify themselves, right? So never attack a person outrightly that way. Use I statements to describe how you're feeling and how that person has made you feel. Tip number 3 is, if you know that there are certain situations in which a certain person is more likely to act out in a way that doesn't align with you and that provokes you anxiety. So maybe it's a party where there's alcohol. This is a really common one. Just don't go, or bring a friend to pull you out of there in case you need to leave, or just to mitigate the situation, right? Because there sometimes people in our lives are the most unfavorable in certain circumstances, right? And you have a right to avoid these circumstances if you feel like it's going to be easier on you and it's going to bring you more happiness. So if there's a certain trigger for that person that makes them more prone to being unlikable, try to avoid that circumstance or suggest something else, right? Because nobody likes a party pooper in any way, shape, or form. So tip number 4 or 5, I think I already lost track here, but I'll say tip number 5. Tip number 5, when you are coming to terms with the fact that there may be somebody in your life who provokes you some kind of feelings of unease or hurt or anxiety, I think I would say this is probably the first step. And I guess I should have mentioned this at the beginning, so my apologies. But tip number 5 is to just understand that a lot of individuals act out of instilled beliefs that they may not recognize that they have, and thus are unintentional. they may be imposing beliefs onto you without even they themselves knowing they have them. And so when we are hurt by someone, it's really normal to take this to heart and to feel offended and to label them as being an outright and inherently bad person for what they've done to us. But in reality, so many times, so many of us act out of instilled beliefs and instilled notions and a desire to fit in with the crowd. And we don't recognize that our actions are hurting other people because to us, they might feel normal because that's just the state that we grew up in, right? So an example that I learned about a couple weeks ago is my mom was telling me. So my mom is Cuban, my dad is Mexican, and my mom grew up in Mexico. She was born in Mexico. So turns out that Cubans, I didn't know this because I guess my whole family now in Mexico that is from Cuba has grown up in a society where they say thank you, right? But turns out that Cubans don't actually say thank you like almost ever when they ask for something or when they receive something, etc., right? So my mom didn't hear this when she was younger, and so she'd go to friends' houses or something, and she would just like never say thank you, right? Because it was just like it was her norm, and she didn't know that that hurt people until one of her friends told her, "Hey, you never say thank you. Like, why is this?" Right? And now my mom says thank you after literally everything. So understanding that a lot of things that people do are unconscious in nature and unintentional for that matter is very liberating and really important towards your healing journey and towards avoiding developing a possible tension with an individual. And no one can know if they're hurting you if you don't outright communicate that with them. So use those I statements, set those boundaries, and it'll save you from a lot of grief in the future. Reason number 6 why you may be experiencing anxiety is because you are placing excessive attention on the past or the future and fearing failure. Now, I spoke about this a little bit at the beginning of the episode where I was talking about burnout, but we are people who spend so much time worrying about the future and what we want to come from the future, and or spending time regretting the past or loathing aspects of our past that we wish could have been different and blaming ourselves for them not having gone differently. So when we do this and we place ourselves in a different part of reality, a different place in reality, and we are stressed out because we're not there yet, and because the progress just isn't where we'd like it to be, and because we are fearful of the outcome of the situation, we are very prone to being constantly anxious because we are stressed about the outcome, like I said, or we are resenting ourselves for an outcome that happened already, or for not having put in a little bit of extra work, whatever it may be, right? When we spend excessive amounts anywhere else but the present, we are living detached from our present reality. And when we're forced to come back into this reality and to be present with people, with our task at hand, we are so focused on what impact that moment is going to have on our future that we don't enjoy it for what it is in the present, right? So when we are spending excessive amounts of times thinking about or hoping for things that happened or we want to happen, but we aren't sure if they're going to happen because they haven't happened yet, and because the future is a construct of our imagination, we're not going to be the happiest people. So my tip for this one is to have a practice of bringing yourself back into the present moment. Things like breath work. So what I really like to do is to, whenever I feel myself getting really angsty and just being disconnected from my body, is to just take breaths in for the count of 4, hold it for the count of 4, breathe out for the count of 4. And I do that as long as it takes me to get back into a state where I feel like I can function presently. Another really good one is the 5 by 5 sense exercise. So what this is for each of your 5 senses, you look around the room and you notice 5 things you can see, 5 things you can smell, 5 things you can touch, 5 things you can hear. And, you know, you might not have, this is a really good excuse for you to pick up a snack if you really want to, because you can do 5 things you can taste. But it's just a really good way of coming back into your body, right? Because your mind can be anywhere in space where you want it to be, but your body is only ever in the present. And it's really important to remind ourselves of that and to kind of visualize ourselves coming back into the body so that we can feel as though we're in the present. Another really good one for this, and it's the last one I'll mention for this section, is to have a personal mantra. One that I really like to tell myself when I'm really stressed is that you are exactly where you need to be. I got that one from Jay Shetty. If you guys didn't know already from the multiple times I've mentioned him on here, I'm a huge Jay Shetty fan, but he really advocates for this one. And I started using it in my day-to-day. And I've found it really helps, actually, because it's a really good reminder that no matter what's happening in the outside world or in my own personal life, all you have is the now, and anything and everything that you are going through in that moment, you are meant to be going through for some reason. And it's just about embracing the process. And once you do these exercises a certain number of times, the breath work, the mantra, the 5x5 sense exercise, or whatever works for you, they're going to become a default. And eventually you will get to a level where you can just notice yourself getting anxiety right away and be able to come back to yourself with your personal exercise. And it's a really good feeling. So I really encourage you guys to find one that works for you. You can find one that somebody else has suggested, like one of the ones I said on here, or find one that works for you. And I find that the more individualized they are, the more it's going to resonate with you, and the more it's going to help you remember if it's something that you kind of branded for yourself. And the 7th and final reason why you may be experiencing anxiety is because you are ignoring your inner voice and avoiding the path of most resistance. I really excited to mention and bring this one up because I feel like this isn't something that is brought up in a lot of podcasts about anxiety, but this one is one that I struggle with a lot, and I'm sure that we all do to a certain extent. But we have been tamed to ignore our intuition. And so a lot of times when we are faced with having to make a difficult decision or having to do something difficult or have a difficult conversation, whatever it is for you, we jump right away towards asking other people for advice, going on Google and asking Google what we should do, and doing everything but asking ourselves first what we should be doing for our own well-being and for our own clarity and for our own state of mind. I feel like so often we are faced with these circumstances that in which we have to get uncomfortable, and there's that little voice, and we can't always hear it because some of us have just tuned it out so much, and it's just knocking right excessively, like listen to me, and it may be like a super faint whisper or like a super loud like your grandma banging two pans together, but it's always there. And so oftentimes we choose to ignore it because we feel like it's the better thing to do, because we just don't trust ourselves. Maybe we failed in the past when we did listen to it, and now we are out of tune with it because we're like, we don't want to fail again, right? And it is so much easier to take the words of advice of somebody else, and if something goes wrong, then you say, okay, well, they were in the wrong because I listened to them, right? I didn't listen to myself. It's way easier to disappoint the guidelines of somebody else versus your own guidelines and your own intuition, right? Because even though I like to think that our intuition is always right, whether or not the outcome goes the way we planned it to. Because if we fail, there was always a lesson that was meant to be taught to us in that circumstance. And it can suck, obviously, if we choose to listen to our intuition and then fail. And then we're like, well, what the heck? You know, like it felt so good to listen to it in the moment, but now we're here. It doesn't feel so good. So when you spend too much time ignoring that voice that is trying to tell you what you should do, you're going to start feeling anxious because it's going to keep knocking. right? That's your higher self telling you this is what's best for you, even if you don't recognize right now, and even if it doesn't feel like it right now, this is what's best for you. And when we start living our lives disconnected from that voice and instead following the ideals and the notions of other people and the ways that people did other things and the way people are telling us to do things, we can't expect to build a trusting relationship with ourselves by listening to the words of other people. And I think a huge practice for all of us, and especially for taming our anxiety, is to learn to fall into that intuition and learn to listen to it and trust it and listen to it with, kindness and compassion and radical empathy, because that's you speaking to you. And that voice is reflecting exactly what you need. It's reflecting your values and it's reflecting your beliefs. And it's telling you what you should do based on your beliefs and your values and your aspirations. So the next time you feel that voice knocking, listen to it and see what it has to say. Even if you feel like your way is the best way and you fact checked it and Google told you it is, listen to it. Because if you're going against your intuition, odds are you're going to end up way unhappier later than if you had followed your intuition and failed. And either way. So listen to that voice, save yourself the constant knocking at the door from your higher self, and just trust that it has something valuable to say and something valuable for you to learn. That is it for the podcast today. You guys, thank you so much for tuning in and for dealing with my honestly hiatuses on here. But before we end the episode, I just want to say thank you to all of you who are consistently tuning in and choosing to listen to me and coping with me and my craziness. I love sitting here and talking and learning and sharing these things with you guys, and my hope is that they are of some value to you and they are helping you grow on your journey towards becoming your best self. And before we go, I just want to give a super quick and exciting announcement and say that for July, I have almost entirely exclusively guests planned for the podcast. So you won't be hearing as much of just me talking to you here. There will be some incredible people that are going to come on here and share their stories and give you some serious life advice and life insight that I'm super excited for them to share with you. So make sure you don't miss out on a future episode. And in order to do that, don't forget to subscribe, follow us on Instagram so you're updated on all the future podcast episodes, and leave a rating, leave a comment, DM me with any suggestions that you have on future topics. And again, thank you so much for tuning in. Your ears and your hearts mean so much to me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Have a great rest of your day.